everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about community red flags. Now, I have spent a lot of time on my channel talking about red flags. I've covered everything from BDSM versus abuse to looking for red flags in relationships, to being able to tell if a relationship is going in the right direction with green flags. And I thought that I had pretty well covered the subject. But I recently had a question from a patron who made me realize that there was actually a big area that I had been leaving out. They were getting ready to go into their local community and they were in the process of finding their first events, but they were really struggling with understanding if the events that they were going to be going to were ethical or if they were going to be places where they were going to feel comfortable. And they noted that in the content that I had made so far about red flags, that I had mostly covered things from the individual level on a one-to-one basis, as opposed to a group setting or looking at events or event organizations, rather than just a simple dom interacting with a potential sub or a bottom and a top meeting each other at a munch, which is generally what I've been talking about in a lot of the previous versions of this conversation. And I do think that it is really important to look at event spaces and really evaluate whether or not they are going to fit with your own standards for BDSM, because not everywhere is made equally. Just because something is on FetLife doesn't necessarily mean that it is a good place to go to or that it has a reputation for safety or anything else like that. So I think it is important to be critical of these things and also learn how to be critical in the first place. Like, what should you even be looking for? And generally my advice for this situation has been to go to munches, to meet people in real life so you can get the lowdown on wherever you are in that specific area and learn kind of what places are good to go to, which places maybe don't have a great reputation, and also learn about things that might not be available online at all. But the flaw with that is munches can also be made by anybody, and it could very well be that the munch you decide to go to is not one that would be well suited for you. And that is what I want to be talking about today, so hopefully you guys can get some tools and look at different community spaces and tell whether or not they are going to be a good fit for you. So let's go ahead and get into it. We are doing a numbered list today, and the number one thing that I want to talk about is the use of drugs or alcohol in that space. And I want to get this one out of the way first because I feel like it might be kind of controversial, because depending on where you are at in the world, the standards for this can be quite different. In my limited knowledge and experience of how things are done in the UK and in Europe in general, alcohol, kink, sex, all that stuff being mixed together in one location and actually being sold there is not entirely uncommon, and it's pretty normal for people to play while completely intoxicated and drunk, and that's just kind of part of the culture there from my understanding and my experience. And in America, I think things are done quite differently. I think here it would be very unusual and would be a red flag for me to see a place that sells alcohol and promotes drunkenness in the people who are engaging in kink play. And there's a couple reasons for why I have this as a concern. The main one is that, at least where I live, every single BDSM space that I know of is ran as a non-profit. And so if you do have a location where things are not being run as a nonprofit and it is a for-profit business where their margins are coming from selling you alcohol, I think that maybe skews the incentives of that location to focus less on like enforcement and safety and more on potentially like getting everybody there really drunk and keeping them drunk with as much booze as possible, because the more booze they sell gets them more money. And not everybody who runs an organization like that will have that kind of like very like Scrooge sort of thing, like do whatever is possible, just sell people the booze. Like, I don't think that's necessarily like exactly what will happen, but that little incentive is still there, and it changes things when something is a for-profit business versus a nonprofit organization. And so that makes me a little bit wary about how they actually prioritize how the space is set up, because it becomes more about having the alcohol present and having more of a party or a club-like atmosphere, as opposed to something where the focus is really on the BDSM play. And at least for me, I don't really want an environment where like the BDSM play is secondary to the partying going on in other aspects. The other reason why this raises red flags for me is, in general, I don't really think that mixing like kink and substances, anything that's like mind altering like that, I don't really think is a great idea, just like without any further caveats. I'm going to talk more about the nuances of that in a moment, but I do have other videos where I've talked about like mixing alcohol and drugs and kink. And I think if you're going into a setting where the idea is to get drunk and then play and just see how the night goes, I think that is potentially setting up a situation where there is more likelihood of consent injuries, of consent violations, of people generally leaving feeling uncomfortable, of people having difficulty using their safe words, people having more difficulty understanding what it is that they're actually consenting to, because drugs and alcohol affect a lot of the decision-making parts of your brain. And if those parts of your brain are not fully operational when you're negotiating for a BDSM scene, it might not go super well for either you or your partner. And I really think when it comes to kink, we should give ourselves the best possible opportunity to create scenes that are going to be beneficial and enjoyable for all of those involved. Now, the caveats to this are obviously there are more advanced ways of negotiating play where I think you can incorporate drugs, alcohol, other intoxicating substances if you want to. And I think the way to do that is with a partner that you already know, somebody you already trust, and playing in a setting that you are familiar with and comfortable with already, and having all of the negotiations done sober, hopefully having a sober companion along with you just in case anything goes totally off the rails, hopefully at least one of the other two partners in the scene also being sober themselves, so at least somebody's in the driver's seat, and having a lot of safeguards in place so you can make sure that this is going to be something that you're comfortable with, and then obviously, you know, accepting the risk that things might go poorly and you might not have the ability while intoxicated to fully communicate your needs or revoke your consent during the scene, and just really understanding what that might mean for your safety with the people you're playing with. And I think you can do that a little bit better in a situation where you do know the person you're playing with versus like doing pickup play while already drunk at a party. Hopefully you can see there's definitely a little bit of a difference there. For some people there might not be one, but I do think there is an important distinction to be made. The other exception to this would be there is a particular style of events that is well known in the leather community where alcohol and or tobacco is involved. So these are called things like boot blacking and cigar parties, or boot blacking, chocolate and whiskey parties. They go by a bunch of different names, and basically the idea is you're in sort of a leather protocol setting where there is service happening. There might also be BDSM play happening, and the way that I have seen this done successfully is it is strictly bring your own, so everyone has to bring their own stuff. It is not provided by the venue, and when you go in, you have to tell them ahead of time, either I am going to be consuming XYZ substances today, or I'm not going to be, and you either get a wristband or you don't. And if you don't have a wristband, you are allowed to play but not consume alcohol or other drugs. And if you do have a wristband, then you are allowed to consume drugs and alcohol, but you are not allowed to play. So everything stays very separated, and I think that creates a very different environment again, where it's not so much about like clubbing and partying. It's about having, you know, a nice cocktail with a few friends while you are having somebody shine your boots, or maybe you are enjoying a nice conversation over a leisurely cigar in the evening, or you are just getting to enjoy play in that sort of environment, in that energy space. So that is a very, very long first one, but it is a complicated one, so I just wanted to get that one knocked out of the way. And everyone's going to have different experiences and opinions about that, so you know, maybe if you're more comfortable with alcohol, or maybe that's normal where you live. But for my own risk profile, what I would generally recommend as a best practice, I don't really think that a venue that primarily is there to serve alcohol as a main income maker for them is going to be a way to have a good BDSM experience. All right, number 2 is gendered pricing structures. If you have ever seen something where it lists the prices as being $50 for single men and $25 for couples and free for single women, that is more or less what a gendered pricing structure looks like. I'm not a big fan of these in general, but when it comes to looking for a BDSM experience, I think this can be a big key indicator of the types of people that go to that event and what their key demographic is. In my experience where I live, the sorts of events that have gendered pricing structures are not so much BDSM events as they are swinger events that are advertised to the kink community. So you might have a swingers club that has like a fetish night or a kink night or a strawberry party. And the idea is that it's primarily about sex with a little bit of kink added in. And if that's your thing, great, go for it. Now you know what to look for. But if you are not somebody who is looking for that kind of thing, if you want to go to a dungeon to meet people and socialize and not have sex and maybe do rope bondage or impact play or other types of purely BDSM things that maybe probably don't have genitals or sex involved in them at all, then maybe this sort of event might not necessarily be for you. And this is one of those things that you can look for to kind of indicate, what sort of people are going to be at that event. Because I think it's important when you're looking at these things to evaluate, are the people who are going to be going to these events the types of people that I want to be interacting with in BDSM, or are these not really my people yet? Because the BDSM world is large and there are lots of different people in it who have many different interests, and some people are very sex focused and some people are very not, and generally speaking a gendered pricing structure will indicate something that is more sex focused. And again, I'm not really a fan of these in general on principle. I think they can potentially be very transphobic for one. I think they can also be quite ableist as well. I think they can be quite hostile towards bisexual people, towards gender nonconforming people, towards a lot of different identities that don't fit within a very clearly structured single man, single woman, heterosexual couple type dynamic. It can be problematic. Let's say that. And not to mention, like, how does the couple pricing work for like a triad or a polycule, or it tends to be more swingery. It tends to be more swingery, and that tends to be a little bit more like monogamous plus. Let's say that's the best way I can think of describing it succinctly, is like monogamous plus, as opposed to like completely like pansexual, open, polyamorous friendly in the way that a lot of other BDSM events can be. So that is just something to keep in mind if you're looking at those types of events. And I could go on a whole other rant about all of the isms and the phobias that go into potentially creating a gendered pricing structure format, but we will save that conversation for another video. All right, number 3 would be places that advertise rules for all S-types or all D-types. Now, when I was first in the community and I was researching things online, it did seem to me that in the 90s, it was a little bit more common to see events that talked about things like, all submissives must be nude and they're not allowed to make eye contact or sit on the furniture, and you must ask their dominant's permission before speaking to them, and they must always have their head downcast, and the dominants must wear leather or latex apparel, and so on and so forth, yada yada yada, a bunch of rules. And I don't necessarily think that it's entirely bad. Like, I think you can have specific protocol parties and themed events where you understand that that is the theme of the event, as opposed to a fundamental belief about what dominance must be or what submissives must do. And so I'm very weary of anywhere that tries to preach a sort of one true way, this is what BDSM always looks like and is meant to be sort of thing, because BDSM is a large world and has room for many different perspectives and different types of people and approaches. And honestly, my biggest concern with something that has these sort of outlines would be that it is used as a place to groom for S-types for whoever is running the event. So I would be very wary if it seems like it's like a single guy or a master with a really big house with like 20 different slaves. Is it because they just really, really like protocol, or is it because this is their hunting ground for single S-types that don't know better and don't realize that it's kind of unusual to just force power exchange on someone in a public event that they haven't negotiated for just by walking in the door? Now, I am sure there are certain events where it is the expectation. I mean, I've been to protocol parties, I've been to plenty of high protocol type events before, but they just have a little bit of a different energy to them where it's less, again, like this is what S-types must be like, versus like we're gonna have a fun theme night where like we're gonna do this one specific thing, but outside of this context we understand that S-types have their own ability to negotiate for themselves and are autonomous human beings. And when people give me vibes that they don't believe that, I get nervous. All right, number 4 would be sex. Now, this very much relates to the gendered pricing structure one, in that I am assuming if you are not looking for super sexual play, you want to know about that ahead of time before you accidentally go to an event where you are not going to be able to do the sorts of things that you want to do. And this requires a little bit more research on your part, really looking at the descriptions for the events, looking at the event organizer's page, looking at the website, looking at reviews or postings about things that have happened there, and really examining what they are saying. If they're using a lot of language like hot available singles, or our amazing orgy room, or the perfect place to get your naughtiest fantasies on, or something like that where it is very sex-driven language, that probably means it's a pretty sex-focused event. Now, for some people this won't be a red flag because a lot of people really like mixing their sex and BDSM. But if you are someone who wants to avoid that, if you prefer non-sexual play, again, you probably want to know about that ahead of time. Like, is there a social beforehand? Do they have a munch beforehand? Or is it like you show up, you unzip your pants, and like, let's get started with the like J-Lube wrestling orgasm, you know? Like, you probably want to be prepared for that before you walk into that sort of situation, right? Now, most legitimate BDSM community spaces are upfront about the types of sexual activity that they do allow in their spaces. Some of them are strictly non-sexual based on the rules of the area where they are. Other places do have a lot of sex that happens at them, but they tend to describe it differently. So they might say that like oral sex is allowed, or that like penetrative sex is allowed if you bring your own sheets, but they describe it in a very matter-of-fact way as opposed to sounding like the back of a vibrator's box. All right, number 5 would be to check to see if they are LGBT plus positive / sex positive. This is more of a little note, but again, I would look at the language that they are using, look to see what sort of things they talk about on their page. In particular, do they use gendered language to refer to different people on different sides of the slash? Like, do they make the assumption that like all submissives are women and all dominants are men? Do they do things like maybe explicitly ban guy on guy or gay activities? Or do they have any other sort of homophobic rules or other sort of sex negative things in their language, in their advertising? If you are somebody who is cis and heterosexual and you fit those molds, it might not be a problem for you, but I also do encourage you as a fellow member of the sex positive world that is BDSM that we don't promote those sorts of events that are exclusionary and homophobic and have those other problematic behaviors. Number 6 is to check who is RSVP'd to the event. This is one of the key things that I do when I'm looking at events, because if I can see that 5 of my friends on FetLife are RSVP'd and I generally trust their judgment, I'm going to be a lot more secure going to that than a random event where no one I know has heard of it and everybody who is RSVP'd is like a blank profile with no picture or seems to only like porn photos or photos from K&P. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad event. It could just be new or the people who are running it are inexperienced. But if it's your first time ever going to events, I wouldn't really leave it up to chance. Just go somewhere where you literally don't even have any faces to associate with who's going to be there. If it's like 3 guys with blank profiles and then just you, I would be pretty skeptical. All right, number 7 would be who is actually in charge. Now, this is another one that might require a little bit more detective work on your part, but if you are in an area and you notice that every munch, every dungeon party, every social, every discussion group seems to be ran by the same person and no one else, I might be a little bit suspicious of that. I actually talked about this in another video I made recently, which will be linked down below when it comes to updated red flags. But having somebody who has a lot of time to give to the community can definitely be a positive thing, and I don't want to tell people that they shouldn't volunteer or they're doing too much, or discourage that if they have the availability to do so. But there can be a little bit of negativity that goes along with that potentially. It could be that somebody does just have the time and the resources, but it could also mean that there's one person in your community who's obsessed with power and like tries to destroy every other event in the area and like gives every other munch a bad name and reports their FetLife accounts and gets their stuff taken down, and you don't really know. So before you RSVP to like the big Mr. Bob's dungeon party, maybe go to a munch first and ask for people like, hey, who's this guy? Try to meet him in person first, get a sense of their personality and why they are running so many events first before you just assume and go with the flow, because you never really know what somebody's intentions might be. And especially if it is, again, somebody who has like, 20 submissives and they run like a giant house, there is a potential that the reason they run all those events is because they might be using it as a hunting ground to find more people to add to their harem. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and combine 8 and 9 together because I think they are closely related. One would be rules and expectations, and the other one would be age checks. And I think these do really go together. I think it's important for BDSM events to have rules and standards. And I think it's important that you should be able to know what those are before you show up, so you are prepared for what you might be experiencing while you're there. If you can, do look for rules and expectations on the FetLife page or in a note somewhere or in a community group or on a separate website, so you know what's going to be happening while they're there. Do they have rules about cell phone usage or outing? Do they have rules about age restrictions? Like, do they have an explicit rule that you have to be at least 18 or 21 in some states to be able to go to this event? Do they actually check IDs? Do they have any procedures in place for if there is a medical emergency? Do they have any procedures in place for, say, banning blood play or open flames? That's something that would be against the rules of the place where they live. I think it's just important to be aware of all of those things before you go into an event. I have seen many events shut down because the people who were running them didn't know better and they violated health codes or fire codes, and they just didn't realize that what they were doing was wrong, and then suddenly everybody in the space had nowhere else to go for parties because the people who were running them had no standards and no way to keep track of their memberships. And it's something to look out for. It's not necessarily something, when it comes to like rules and expectations, like it's just something you need to be aware of, and if they don't have any, that is definitely a red flag. And oh my god, if they don't check ages for people, if they don't actually look at IDs, that is a big, big red flag. You do not want to walk into a situation where you are accidentally doing BDSM with a 16-year-old, because oh boy, that could cause you a lot of problems down the line. All right, now the last one I want to talk about today, guys, is cleaning and safer sex supplies. So if you go to an event and nobody can tell you what the mysterious liquid is in the spray bottles that you're supposed to use in all the equipment, that might be a problem. Do they have any cleaning equipment at all? Do they have any dental dams or condoms? Do they have sheets or towels? If they don't provide their own, do they have the expectations that other people need to bring them to use them? BDSM spaces can be messy, they can be dirty, hopefully they are kept clean, but I do think it is best practice to at least have cleaning supplies available, or at minimum, some kind of expectation in place about like, hey, if you want to play in our dungeon furniture, you have to bring your own sheet and take it home with you. Or you have to buy a sheet here and then you're allowed to keep it. Or you are required to wipe down the surfaces before and after all your play with this one cleaning solution. Because otherwise, it's really easy to spread things, not like really drastic stuff necessarily, but like if somebody comes in with like a cold or the flu and they think that they're fine and they come in and they don't wipe down ahead of time and then they play in the spanking horse and then they're in a rush to do aftercare and nobody's there to make sure that things get cleaned between scenes, and then somebody else comes along and then does another 2-hour-long scene on top of the spanking bench and then comes in contact with the surface that that person was just sneezing on for like 20 minutes. Yeah, that's not particularly great, is it? I don't really want to like gross anybody out, but like basic hand washing principles, basic cleanliness principles will get you pretty far in life. And I certainly think it's something worth considering for your own health and well-being if you're going to a space where like they don't have any safer sex supplies there, they don't have any cleaning supplies there, and they don't even really know what it is that they're supposed to be doing to prevent all of that contamination from possibly occurring or infections from spreading in the community. Also, just a little side note here, because I've been sick like 3 times in the past month, please don't go to BDSM events or your local gym if you're still contagious, because, oh man, it's so easy to like spread your germs everywhere and not even realize it. And you don't even know what immunocompromised people are going to your events, and they deserve to be able to go to things as well and enjoy things, and just let people enjoy things and don't spread sickness and Okay, public health service announcement over. I really have to go now. I'm going to be late. Oh, I'm going to be so late for my class now. I have a dance class after this. I'm going to be so late, so I'm going to wrap this up right now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Any other comments and questions you can leave down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for being here and for interacting with my content. Hopefully you found this interesting and enjoyable. If you did, please do subscribe and make videos twice a week. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support my work, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. Link to that will be down in the description box below if you haven't already checked that out. If you have and you are a patron, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.